Now, let me just quickly invite Mr. Suhel Seth once again to talk to us about, does the media have a pernicious influence in India? And Mr. Suhel clearly needs no introduction in this country. More importantly, at this event, he's already been on stage a couple of times. You just heard him in the session prior to Venu's, so I leave it all to Suhel.
Thank you, Maruf. Ladies and gentlemen, if we analyze the development of the Indian media post-independence, there was no question that 90% of Indian media at that point in time was in the hands of private players. 10% was in the hands of trusts. The two newspapers that were at that point in time very powerful and were part of a trust were the Tribune in Punjab and the Statesman in Calcutta. But a lot has changed in the media situation, but nothing much has changed as far as ownership of the media is concerned. With every societal evolution, the media has to play two very important roles to my mind. The first is to be a watchdog and not a lapdog. Number two, it has to decide the freedoms it will espouse and the causes it will herald. Before independence and as a run-up to independence, we saw the Indian media actually stand by the average Indian citizen in his or her quest for freedom. But post that, significant developments have happened, and some very good and some pretty unsavory. So let me try and paint a picture which is by no means completely accurate because I'm saying so, but it's just a perception that one has. Media today is no longer only about the causes it supports. It is no longer about celebrating the good that happens in India, and it is continuing to be driven by money and money alone. When that kind of development and that kind of intrusiveness happens in any media environment, the person who suffers the most is the common man or woman. I have gone public, and I will say this at the cost of shooting myself, since shooting is a good phrase today. I was one of the first supporters of MediaNet when the Times of India brothers asked me about it. And my logic was that if you are transparent and you have a rate card for your society pages or your supplements, and if you charge based on that and you make it known to people that it is a MediaNet advertorial activity, I'm fine. Because what was happening was that a lot of the society journalists were being paid in cash by people who wanted to be featured on those pages. So what you were doing was you were institutionalizing something that could easily run amok. And for all the heap of abuse that has been showered on the Times of India group, let me say this, that many newspaper groups, many media groups continued even before and now having these advertorials, or what were they called, sponsored supplements. The one person who I've deeply respected, and he's a very, very dear friend, is a guy called Avik Sarkar from Calcutta, who owns the Ananda Bazaar group. And the reason for my respect is when, as a young advertising executive, I wanted to, play truant, and we created an advertorial page for Asian Paints because we launched something called Sharot Shomman, which is the pujas, the best pujas being given an award. And I remember Avik being on holiday, and I didn't know him well at all at that point in time. And I knew all the, advertising and circulation people be on puja break. And we used the same font and the same typography of the Telegraph. When it came out the next day, there was hell. Because Avik said it violated the sanctity of a newspaper, even though it was mentioned on top. So the moot point is that media can play and must at times play a very, very significantly responsible role. Today, however, and I've said this of many newspapers, I don't want to name newspapers, but today you don't need spectacles to read newspapers in India, most newspapers. You need a hose pipe, because there's almost a plant on every page. Corporate rivalries and corporate battles today, unfortunately, are finding their way to the media and through the media. That is pernicious. What is equally pernicious is the mechanism with which media has allowed itself to be manipulated and used not only by political parties, but by agendas, by some agendas which are not purposeful, and at the same time not giving time or space to the causes that deserve their time and space. I have gone hoarse telling my friends in the media, both on television and in print, to cover very, very important issues, one of them being the manner in which the government of Maharashtra, in collusion with the government of India, is messing up the entire Bombay Port Trust and the entire building of marinas and, citizen parks around that. No one listens. But it's more important to cover a shaggy, bearded guru, going on some goddamn hunger strike. But citizen issues are not finding their place in newspapers. Any society which ignores the media's influence and allows the media to manipulate its citizens leaves itself open for not just ridicule, but for regression. And that is my other point, that we don't have, in large parts of India, a responsible media any longer. We've also made editors into demigods. I never saw S. Nihal Singh in all my years in Calcutta. He was never visible. Neither was Shananda Dattare ever visible. Nor was Girilal Jain found at every social party. Today, editors are seen and not read. Today, editors have become stars unto themselves. There's stardom that has crept into the media. The role that media must play, as I would call it in theater parlance, they were the stage whisperers. They were the prompters. They weren't the artists themselves. And what has happened in some strange, dichotomous way is the very adulation that the media is supposed to report on is now showering it on itself. I think what NDTV has done, and I must make full disclosure, they are clients of mine, but I think what NDTV has done in taking Nielsen to court in New York is wonderful. Because that too is a manipulation by the Nielsen company of actually manufacturing television rating points and TRPs. The problem is not the media, the problem is the money which is today being used to fund the media. A news magazine known for its great independence is funded by a man of dubious distinction, K.D. Singh. He was the same chap who was caught with 60 lakhs, and he's a funder of the Helka. I have no issues. Go, do whatever you want, but then don't wear the veneer of morality. When you wear the veneer of morality, you must be moral from within. That veneer of morality will escape you the day you have full disclosure. The tragedy is the Indian media, as was brilliantly said by Khushro Irani, and I was no fan of his, he said the Indian media is as free as it chooses to be. Have we got a situation where the Indian media declares ownership? Do I know? I mean, I know some of the people, I know the Jains, I know the Bharatiyas, I know the Sarkars. But do I know who owns how much of what channel? I have made it a rule before I go on to any television program. I remember abusing Mamata Banerjee. It's very easy to do. At the time Singur happened, and I said that I represent and work on branding and marketing for some companies of the Tata Group, but not Tata Motors. We don't have disclosure in the manner that we should. So the media doesn't have the moral right to exercise the kind of authority it believes it must exercise. The Bible isn't entirely wrong when it says, let he who hasn't sinned cast the first stone. But when you sin and sin repeatedly under the guise of morality, that is worry, that is pernicious. Today if you see television channels, and I will say this publicly, not because NDTV is a client, and I will say the same about two other people who I know are at the head of their channels. I think Pranoy's integrity and, honesty and purposefulness is known. But so are Rajdeep, so is Arnab. I know Arnab gets, derided at times for being aggressive, but I know he has no agenda. You may be wrong, that's fine, but you can't be manipulative. What one is seeing in India is that the media is willing to offer itself as a tool for manipulation, for building up truths where truths don't exist, for creating platforms for people which shouldn't be created. The art of writing has also escaped many of our editors and newspapers, and certainly the art of conversation as far as television is concerned. So you can't have a situation where you talk about the fourth estate and the fourth estate doesn't allow itself up for scrutiny. I would like to know as a citizen who owns how much of which newspaper or media group. Why should those companies have to be publicly listed? Those companies are in the public domain because of the influence they wield over the public of this country, and therefore must have certain levels of disclosure. It is not necessary to have the disclosure norms as laid out by the registrar of magazines and newspapers. And when will this society change? It won't, because the amount of money that is being consumed by media organizations to stay afloat is becoming humongous. The advertising pie is not increasing. I can tell you with my hand on my heart that there are very few newspaper groups today or media groups in today's India which are profitable. Very, very few. I would imagine 3 or 4. You have big industrialists taking up vital stakes in companies, in media companies. So you are going to have not only issues with conflict of interest, you are going to see even more corporate wars being fought using media as a conduit. But who's going to control the media? You have an absolute lunatic who's now the head of the Press Council of India, who wants to comment on everything from Dant Manjan to Mayawati. You can't have Kaju actually regulating the media because he has no self-regulation to speak of. So we are actually in a kind of a death trap, and I don't know, I have many, many friends in the media, and I keep asking them, when will this change? Because it is the media and the media alone that has highlighted many good causes, has brought people to book, but it is also the same media that has manufactured a lot of incidents and used that manufacturing device to perpetrate someone else's agenda. We can't build the Republic of India and replace it with the Republic of nexuses. The media must not and cannot offer itself as a conduit for some nexus building, which is what's happening. So where do we go from here? The advertiser is also in bed with the media, because the advertiser runs corporations. Corporations need the media at times, either to perform dirty tricks or to hide reportage which should be effective. So that's one element. The second element where I think the Indian media, at least to my mind, should play a greater role is in celebrating real India. Is actually in bringing back some elements of pride while parliamentarians try their very best to destroy that. That is not happening. There are programs far in between, but we don't have a real movement. We don't have a campaign where you actually celebrate the artisans of India, where you celebrate the music of India. I remember many years ago when I was in Ogilvy, we did Mile Sur Mera Tumhara with Suresh Malik. The whole objective of that was not to incite or ignite patriotism. Patriotism is almost non-cognitive. It was to stoke nationalism around music which is integrating. We don't have those causes anymore. I ask and beg of media organizations at times to carry stuff that I think needs recognition. But, it doesn't get carried all the time. If there are movements that need media support, today the media says, okay, pay us, and then we'll carry it. So while the media can question the social responsibility norms of corporations, does it question its own social responsibility? And how does that social responsibility get played out? We're also not celebrating the real virtues of being Indian and Indianness, the Bharatiyata, as it were. And I'm telling you, we will give way to the Kanalis and the Guccis of this world if we don't preserve our legacy and our heritage. The Taj, again, full disclosure, one of my clients does an amazing job with a Banarsi weaver. Jai has been doing it for years with her bunch of artisans and craftspeople. And it's important to preserve the legacy of the Banarsi weaver for the simple reason that that entire tribe is going out of fashion. They live in penury. The margins that are made, the margins that are added on are obscene. And to my mind, it is actually, in a strange way, the media that brought the plight of the weavers on an NDTV program which Mr. Krishna Kumar happened to see. So the media can unwittingly and at times unwillingly play this tremendous role. But can we institutionalize that? No society has as many media organizations as India does. Not one. Developed or developing. Today, the pernicious influence even extends to the levels of influence that they wield even during election time. You should see the havoc that cable operators unleash on the unsuspecting voter. So we can sit here and be proud of our fourth estate as an institution. But the institution, to my mind, needs to regenerate, rejuvenate, and re-energize. Because what's happening is the institution is allowing itself, like other institutions in our country, to go adrift. It's very, very difficult to build an institution the likes of which the media is one, with robustness if you allow them to go adrift. And this pernicious influence is debilitating. It debilitates a nation, it debilitates nationalism, and at the worst, it creates a fear, a spread of negativity. And that's what's happening. I said this yesterday, this government and other governments have done a lot of good, but it just doesn't get communicated. We can't be a nation that's built every morning on bad news. So the celebration of real India, the importance of declaring or full disclosure, the criticality of neutrality and independence, and its role as a watchdog rather than a lapdog can't be more underscored than I'm doing. And to my mind, if the media is able to contain itself, to reorganize itself, and reposition its worth, it will be respected. Otherwise, the phrase that is now gaining currency, ye to journalist hai, bikau hai, big gaya hoga, will become the same epithet that you use for politicians. And you don't want that. Because like in every other organization, you have wonderful people in the media, people deeply committed. People committed not only to India, but committed to the causes that must drive a progressive and a real India. But that can only happen if we put our shoulders to the wheel and decide that if we are going to be morally calling for accountability, we've got to be morally accountable. You cannot ask for accountability when your own house is in such disarray. Thank you so much. Any questions? Kamani?
You know, in marketing, we say that consumers vote with their feet and their wallets. So would it not hold true for media? If I don't agree with a particular editorial policy of a magazine, I'll stop buying it. And same thing for the channels. And it is said that people get the leaders they deserve. So are we getting the media that we deserve?
No, that's the distinction. The media is not supposed to reflect marketing. The advertising in that media environment is supposed to, be consumer fixated or consumer centric. The problem is that today we are fashioning the pages based on marketing considerations rather than on editorial. Did you read a newspaper today? Kamani? Okay. Well, if you do, I've often asked people, tell me, how many of you have read today's Times of India? What's the front page ad? That club that guy who keeps advertising, join the club. Then you're one of the few. Otherwise, front page solos for which media organizations charge 100% premium, most people can't remember the front page ad. That's the reality. How many of us are actually reading editorials today? There was a time when we had middles in the Times of India. So you had 3 edit pieces. The first was serious, the second was satire, and the third was, related to development or community. Gone. So you can argue that, oh, today's consumer is in a rush, therefore he doesn't need the middle, he doesn't need an editorial. But surely that's not a decision that a consumer must make. What do you stand for as a media organization? Which are the kind of columnists you would want? And do you have disclosure of those columnists and their agendas? So it's pretty, opaqueness is good for reflective glass. It's not very good for media, especially when you're a media organization. Harry?
Yeah, something you said that almost all media guys are making losses in India. There are very few guys who are making money. I was given to understand that to print a newspaper it costs about 15, 20 rupees by the time it's delivered to you, but the price is only 2 rupees. So obviously the revenue is coming from the ads and the other side. Don't you think that is going to have an influence on what the editorial comes? Or where do you think it's, how deep is that, and what's the way out if an editor wants to have independence? Don't you think he loses his job if he tries to have over-independence and loses the advertising media, the revenue?
But it's happened. I mean, you're right, it's happened. People have lost their jobs. But I'm saying you can't suddenly tell a Catholic priest that I want you to be a DJ at night in the same church because the church isn't getting enough money from its parishioners. I mean, the logic is you are in a pretty sanctified you're in a pretty sanctified role. It is called the fourth estate with a reason, with a purpose. There is a certain enhanced air of morality that is linked or indexed to it. And today's editors, I'm afraid, some of them have become businessmen because of the compulsions. And what has also happened is there are too many corrupt people in this country with easy money in the corporate world who can fund a newspaper. So what you're seeing is, you're seeing excessive competition. The pie is actually decreasing. For all of us who are virtuous about television appearances on English news channels, only 3% of television viewing in the news space. The rest is all language. And I can tell you, I don't want to take names, I'm already getting into so much bloody trouble. There were packages being offered by television companies for elections. So if your per column rate is, say, 100 rupees, you give us 2,000 rupees for that same during election, and we'll also give you advertorial or editorial support. This is the kind of nonsense that's going on. Where the hell is Kaju? Where the hell are these self-regulators of media? There are media groups which have instituted tariff cards for just election packages. You're not selling McDonald's combo meals. So you continue to do that, what will happen is, as Kamini said, forget consumer, you'll just be taken less seriously. I've always said, and I think it was Plato if I'm not mistaken, my belief about citizenship is slightly warped. You have 3 kinds of citizens: the enraged, the engaged, and the indifferent. Before independence, we were an engaged citizenry. We were engaged with the idea of a free India. When progress didn't happen after Nehruvian economics came into place and, license Raj and the more virtuous, clean goddess called Indira Gandhi came to power, we were then enraged. For the last 8 years or 6 years, we've become indifferent. That's the worst kind of citizenry to have. And you can't be an indifferent citizenry just like you can't have a non-engaged citizenry as far as the media is concerned. That engagement platform must exist. Jaya.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about something where the citizen's voice comes into newspapers, which is the letters to the editor column. Except for the Hindu, which usually likes to have letters on both sides of the picture, I find now more and more newspapers are in fact publishing letters which support their view and are very selected, and it's the same people whose letters are published all the time. And very often I have told my friends to respond to some ridiculous nonsense in the papers by writing in. They've done so, and it's a beautiful filtering effort. Nobody publishes those letters. Now, this is a very dangerous area where the citizen's voice is also being blocked off by the media, which is supposed to be free expression. So would you please talk about that here and elsewhere?
I think that's a very important point. I know of only one editor in a mainline media environment, Vinod Mehta, who loves publishing letters which damn him. But other than that, I have not seen anyone with that kind of courage. B, other than a few of us, a handful of us, I don't think people are now even engaged with the art of writing letters to the editor. I find that in three pockets largely. I find that in the South, there's a lot of letter writing that happens in Bengal, and then there's a lot of letter writing that happens out of Bombay, but that's thanks to the Parsis. But otherwise, everyone else is not bothered. Jyoti.
Thank you. I would like to know that in the press, to what extent is the right to freedom justified, and where live coverage is concerned of any incident? And is there any understanding or agreement on restraint amongst the media persons on this issue? Thank you.
See, I have very radical views, but to hell with that. I'm a great believer that all this nonsense of sting operations and, undercover journalism is nothing but a marketing device to sell more copies. If you have the courage, you must expose yourself, because we're not in, Sherlock Holmes land. As far as the freedom to report, I remember George W. Bush's first executive order on the 11th of September was that none of the media channels will show any body bags or bodies throwing themselves out of the World Trade Center. And that was an embargo that everyone followed. Till this morning, the UK press followed an embargo that none of the royals would be shown in disparaging terms until Murdoch broke that, condition, as it were. But I think the Indian media, to my mind, has been, by and large, pretty responsible and respectful in the first incident. When 26/11 happened, and there was a lot of media reportage, and I'm aware of, the situation that you and the men you had under your command were in, because of, actual footage being shown of helicopters, dropping troopers down and all that. I think post that, there has been some kind of introspection within media organizations as to what to show and what not to show while an incident of that nature is playing out. But that apart, I don't think the Indian media has been irresponsible in terms of excessive probing or excessive rudeness. We are far, far better than the tabloid press in the UK, or for that matter in the United States. But then again, your second part about sting, and I'm not a believer in that. I think it's a waste of time and money. Thank you.